Tom Hackney, I'm Chief of Detectives here at the Sheriff's Office. I'm going to cover the incident that we had, the officer-involved shooting from yesterday evening. I'll go through some of the particulars of it and give you what additional information that we have. Last night around 5 p.m., we had 3 on-duty SWAT team members who had actually been at our firing range near the location where this occurred on Lem Turner Rd. As they're leaving and they broke for dinner, they're still on duty. We're going to grab a bite to eat. As they're going south on Lem Turner Rd, they observed a blue and white pickup truck. It passed another vehicle in front of them, and when it passed that vehicle, it struck a third vehicle that was in front of them. Now, these officers immediately thought that maybe this was a crash, but when the suspect truck struck the vehicle another 2 times, it was obvious to them at that point in time that this was an intentional act and not a crash or an accident. As the vehicle was struck for about the 3rd time, the vehicle that was struck went off the road and went into the wooded area. The truck that struck them, it too went off the road. However, it flipped and landed on the driver's side. The detective stopped, went to investigate what was going on. Again, knowing that this was an intentional act, they approached the one person, the female that was in the car that had been struck. She immediately told them that that was her ex-husband and he was trying to kill her. The detectives now, again, putting the facts together that this was an intentional act with what the woman told them, went to investigate and check on the driver of the truck. He was alone inside the truck and was in the driver's seat. The truck was, again, on its driver's side. They made contact with him, began to have a conversation with him through the window of the truck. He was compliant, having a conversation, conversing back and forth with them. They told him to keep his hands where they were visible, which he did, put his hands actually on his head. At that time, initially there were 3 detectives. Shortly there, upon their arrival, a 3rd detective arrived, and that 3rd detective is one of our SWAT TAC medics, and he is actually a firefighter for Jacksonville Fire Rescue that in his off-duty time is a reserve officer for us, works with the SWAT team on their call-outs, so they have a paramedic with them. So he arrived. So there's 4 detectives at the scene, 3 of which are making conversation with the subject. The 4th detective is watching the occupant, the suspect, in the pickup truck. Again, he's compliant, his hands are on his head, and he's obeying commands. As they formulate a plan to get him out of the truck, which was remove the windshield from the vehicle, they're going to pull him out through the front windshield, the detective, Jared Reston, who was the shooting officer, was in the back of the truck. He observed the suspect next to him. And again, the truck is on its side, so this is more or less on the driver's side window area, the vent window area that's on its side. He observed a handgun there. He made the suspect aware that he saw it, gave the suspect instructions to not touch the gun, not make moves for the gun, to stay where he was. The suspect initially did just that and kept his hands on the back of his head. They formulated again the plan to safely get him out of that vehicle. Shortly thereafter, the suspect moved from the position where he was, reached for that gun. The detective, who was armed with his issued AR-15 rifle, fired 6 times at the suspect, striking him multiple times in the upper body. The suspect was announced dead at the scene by the paramedic who was on scene already. The detective in case has been placed on administrative leave, which is standard per our policy, and the case is still working. Inside the truck, we recovered a .32 caliber, which is here to my left, Beretta .32 caliber. It was loaded with one in the chamber and more rounds inside the handgun. Officer Jared Reston is the shooting officer. He's a 10-year veteran of the Sheriff's Office and a SWAT team member for 8 years. The 3 other detectives who were on the scene was 1 Sergeant Jim Walters, also a SWAT team member, Detective Mickey Mitley, as well as a SWAT medic, Maury Cooksey. He was on scene. We have identified the suspect in this case that was shot as Clifton Joel Day. He's a 55-year-old white male. The woman who was struck was indeed his ex-wife, Sandra Day. She's a 52-year-old white female. The 2 were married for 31 years. They were divorced in 2012. The Sheriff's Office Baker acted the suspect back in 2012. She has within the last few years prior to their divorce, a fairly significant history of domestic violence involving the suspect. Back in December of 2011, he was arrested and charged with a felony battery against her from November of 2011. The Sheriff's Office has the Invest team that deals with domestic violences, It is the Intimate Violence Enhanced Service Team. There's a detective from JSO, there's a member from Hubbard House, and a City Victim Services Coordinator who go over domestic battery calls. This is an attempt to mitigate some of the circumstances that lead to domestic homicides. Our detective from our Invest team made contact with the victim in this case, offered services to her. She initially cooperated and was interested. We went out and talked to the suspect in this case, which is fairly standard. We will give them warnings to stay away from the victim, no more contact. We make them aware of what could be the case. If they continue, we make the victim aware of what the services that are available to them are. There was no further contact by him at that point in time, so that case was suspended. There were at least 6 calls that were worked at Jacks Beach involving the suspect and victim in this case. She lived out at Jacks Beach, so the majority of these cases were actually worked and investigated by the Jacksonville Beach Police Department. I can answer a few questions if anybody has in reference to this incident.
Was the gun registered?
The gun, we're waiting for the return on the gun with it. There's no registration when it comes to firearms like that. We would be able to know whether it was stolen. There's no obvious report that it had been stolen at this time. So we would be able to come back and see who purchased the firearm, but much of that would be about all we have, and that will take us some time to get that back.
Did Reston give any immediate commands right prior to shooting? I mean, they told him to stay away from the gun, but was there anything else, like, just before you?
Immediately prior to him firing the gun, he either told him to stop or don't. The witness detectives at the scene heard him say stop or don't, or maybe the combination of the two. But yeah, there was an immediate order to him to not do what he was doing. Now, this could be, and it's hard to know what's going through this man's mind at the time, because he went from compliant and obeying commands to all of a sudden not being compliant and not obeying commands. This could be something where he decided all of a sudden this could be a suicide by cop, and it was obvious that we were police officers on the scene. It was obvious that the police officers on the scene saw the gun because they had a conversation about the gun, and it was obvious that he was compliant and was not having anything else happen to him. So he made a decision somewhere in his mind to reach for that gun. And again, the detective worried for not only his safety, but there's 3 other detectives who are there in the immediate vicinity of this truck. You're forced to use.
Chief, the ex-wife has just said that they've called JSO out to their house several times for domestic incidents, but you didn't respond. Are you aware of any of those calls? Yeah,
the incidents that occurred were at Jacksonville Beach. The incident that we had called out to was the November 11th call. We made an arrest in that case. That was the case in which she had a injunction served, the case from November 2011 is the case that she used to get her injunction for protection. That was served in November of that year, or December of that year that it was issued. Those are the only cases that we've had. When we've been involved, we've made arrests. You may want to have to get with the Jacksonville Beach Police Department for some of their dispositions, because there's at least 6 calls through the Jacksonville Beach Police Department that involve the 2.
Can you talk about the conversation before? You said he was compliant. Were these short answers? Did he seem injured, maybe out of it? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
In great detail, no. These were instructions being given by the detective to comply with his orders, to stay where he was, to keep his hands visible, and he did have these conversations. Yes, I understand. Yes, I know. He asked how she was immediately, asked how his ex-wife was, if she was hurt. So these are very short, little brief conversations, but enough to indicate that he's coherent, that he's able to converse back and forth.
So he didn't seem out of it or extremely injured. What were his injuries like before that point?
I'm not sure, and I wouldn't even want to speculate.
When did the Invest team talk with her?
The Invest team, our involvement with the Invest team was December of 2011. So after we made the arrest in December of 2011 for the aggravated domestic battery against him, that's when the Invest team involved themselves with her and him both.
And that was y'all's last contact with them?
Yes. Well, we Baker Acted him in 2012, but in reference to calls for service involving the 2 of them, yes, that was.
Can you talk about Officer Reston? This is his 4th police-involved shooting. Is that a lot for a JSO officer?
I don't want to say that it's a lot of, I've said this before when we talk about these involved officer shootings. that what we do as police officers is an inherently dangerous job. Where they happened to be last night was no special operation, no pre-planned mission. It could have been any other officer who was happening along at the same time. Luckily for this woman, these officers were there and able to immediately be there and take care of the situation. This is an incident where this man was obviously intent on hurting this woman. This is, broad daylight, heavily crowded traffic area. He's passing other vehicles to run her off the road, and that shows his intent to hurt or kill her or worse. So who knows, if we weren't there and he would have gotten out of that car, we could have had a domestic murder that occurred right there on the side of the road. So, I don't want to comment on the number of shootings from Officer Reston. These are, again, these incidents that happen. Officers are put in these situations daily where where deadly force could be used and isn't. It's unfortunate. Nobody sets out at the beginning of their workday as a police officer with the intent of taking a life. It is unfortunate. It impacts that officer greatly, and it's not a light decision that's made at any given time to use deadly force.
Are there other officers in JSO's history who have more than 4 police-involved shootings?
I would have to do some research on that. We can do that if need be. But again, talking specifically about this incident that occurred yesterday and the fact that it was serious in nature and that it could have saved this woman's life by these officers being at the right place at the right time.
Did she say that she had any issues with her ex-husband recently, maybe just this year, since the divorce?
At this point in time, they were trying to sell a house that was a joint house that they had when they were married. And I believe there had been some conversations about that, and that may have been what triggered this yesterday. But again, that's still being looked into.
But this had been the first time she said that there had been anything violent or she felt endangered recently?
Recently, yes.
Any further questions?
Okay. Thank you all for your assistance.